Funny how the first person you disrespect in the morning might be the one signing your evaluation before sunset. The words drifted through the crowded lobby of the Westbrook Police Headquarters in Dallas, Texas, but nobody paid attention. Officers hurried between hallways carrying coffee, paperwork, and radios crackling with overnight reports. The station had the familiar rhythm of another busy Monday, filled with conversations, ringing phones, and the confidence that came from routine. Near the front entrance, a woman quietly stepped inside carrying a slim black leather portfolio. She paused for only a second, taking in the building with calm eyes before walking toward the reception desk. Her name was Imani Rhodes. She wore a tailored navy business suit, polished black heels, and carried herself with quiet confidence that seemed almost effortless. She wasn't smiling, yet she didn't appear nervous either. It was the expression of someone who had prepared for this day far longer than anyone else realized. Behind the reception counter, Officer Caleb Mercer glanced up from his computer before returning to his paperwork. Morning. Public entrance is around the other side if you're filing a report. Imani smiled politely. I'm actually here for an appointment. Caleb barely looked at her again. Human resources? No. Community outreach? No. He sighed. Then what exactly are you here for? Someone is expecting me. Before Caleb could answer, two more officers walked through the lobby carrying breakfast sandwiches and laughing about a football game from the night before. Officer Tyler Dawson noticed Imani standing quietly near the desk. Looks like somebody's lost, he joked. His partner chuckled. Maybe she's looking for the volunteer office. A few nearby officers laughed under their breath. Imani remained composed. No, thank you. Tyler leaned casually against the counter. Well, this area is for department personnel only. Visitors usually don't wander around in business suits. I understand, Imani answered calmly. That's why I'm waiting. Her steady voice somehow made the conversation even more awkward, but Tyler mistook her composure for uncertainty. Waiting for who? He asked with a grin. The chief? Several officers nearby laughed louder this time. One detective walking past shook his head without stopping. Another receptionist exchanged an uncomfortable glance with a coworker but stayed silent. Nobody wanted to interrupt what they assumed was harmless workplace humor. Imani looked toward the hallway leading deeper into the building. She checked the time on her watch, then returned her attention to the officers. It shouldn't be much longer. Tyler folded his arms. You know, confidence is impressive. But eventually you've got to tell someone why you're here. I will, she replied. At the appropriate time. That answer only encouraged more whispers across the lobby. One officer quietly guessed she must be interviewing for an administrative position. Another suggested she was probably meeting someone from city government. No one imagined anything beyond that. The assumptions came easily because assumptions always do. Caleb finally stood from behind the desk and picked up a visitor badge. Look, department policy says we need to know who you're meeting before we can issue this. Imani nodded respectfully. That's understandable. She reached into her portfolio, paused for a brief moment, then closed it again without removing anything. I'll wait. Across the lobby, the large wall clock clicked closer to 8 o'clock. Staff members began gathering near the conference hallway. Uniforms were straightened. Conversations became quieter. Something important was obviously about to happen, although most of the officers assumed it was another routine staff briefing. Tyler glanced toward the hallway, then back at Imani. If you're still standing here in 5 minutes, I'll personally walk you back outside. His tone was casual enough to draw another round of laughter. Imani simply met his eyes, neither offended nor intimidated. I appreciate your concern, she said softly. But I think I'll be exactly where I'm supposed to be. For reasons none of them could explain, those words lingered in the air long after the laughter faded, leaving the lobby with a strange feeling that the morning was about to become something none of them would ever forget. The quickest way to reveal a workplace culture is to watch how it treats someone it believes has no authority. At exactly 7:58 a.m., the steady buzz inside Westbrook Police Headquarters continued as though nothing unusual had happened. Officers crossed the polished lobby with steaming coffee cups, dispatchers hurried toward the communications center, and detectives compared notes from overnight investigations. Yet in the middle of that organized chaos, one person remained perfectly still. Imani Rhodes stood beside the reception desk, her leather portfolio resting comfortably against her side, her expression calm enough to make several people even more uncomfortable. Officer Tyler Dawson glanced at the large clock hanging above the lobby entrance before looking back at her. "You've got about 2 more minutes before this place gets really busy," he said with a grin. "If you're waiting for someone, you might want to step aside." Imani smiled politely. "Thank you for the suggestion." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "That's it? No argument?" "I don't see a reason to argue." A few nearby officers exchanged amused looks. They had expected annoyance or frustration. Instead, the woman standing in front of them answered every sarcastic remark with remarkable patience. Somehow that calm confidence became its own source of curiosity. Officer Caleb Mercer leaned against the reception counter. "Look, we've asked several times. What's the name of the person you're meeting?" Imani met his eyes without hesitation. "You'll know soon enough." Tyler laughed louder than before. "That's mysterious." Another officer walking past added, "Maybe she's interviewing to become the mayor." The small group chuckled again. None of them noticed that several civilian employees nearby had stopped smiling. One administrative assistant quietly glanced at Imani, then toward the executive hallway, as though she recognized something she couldn't quite explain. She lowered her voice and whispered to a coworker, who immediately looked toward the lobby entrance with growing uncertainty. Meanwhile, Tyler continued entertaining his audience. "You know what he said? Let's make a guess. Human Resources? City Hall? Inspector General? Or maybe..." He paused dramatically before pointing toward the hallway leading to the executive offices. "The chief's office." Laughter echoed once more. Imani simply answered, "You're getting warmer." For the first time, Tyler's smile faded for a fraction of a second. Her reply hadn't sounded defensive. It sounded genuine. Before he could respond, the front doors opened again. 2 black SUVs quietly pulled into the reserved parking area outside the station. Through the glass entrance, several people in business attire stepped onto the sidewalk. A maintenance employee passing through the lobby noticed them first. "Looks like City Hall's here," he muttered. Caleb looked outside and frowned. "Nobody said we had visitors this morning." The receptionist checked the internal calendar again. Nothing unusual appeared on the schedule. Tyler shrugged. Probably another budget meeting. Across the room, Imani casually adjusted the sleeve of her navy jacket before checking her watch once more. 8 o'clock. Exactly on time. She slowly closed her portfolio and rested one hand on it, as though preparing for an important introduction rather than waiting for permission to enter. Her breathing never changed. Her posture never shifted. She had experienced enough first days in her career to understand that people often revealed more about themselves during the first 5 minutes than during the following 5 years. The elevator doors opened at the far end of the lobby. Conversations immediately became quieter. Senior command staff began walking toward the entrance in full dress uniforms. Their expressions were serious, but not tense. They appeared to be expecting someone important. Tyler noticed the movement and instinctively straightened his uniform shirt. Caleb stood behind the reception desk, suddenly looking much more professional than he had only moments earlier. Around the lobby, casual conversation stopped almost at once. The building seemed to inhale together. Yet while every officer turned toward the approaching command staff, none of them noticed that the senior officials weren't looking at the entrance. Their eyes were fixed on only one person standing quietly beside the reception desk. And for the first time that morning, Imani Rhodes allowed herself the smallest, almost invisible smile. The room always changes before the truth arrives. Most people simply don't notice it. The laughter that had filled the lobby only moments earlier disappeared almost without anyone realizing why. Senior officers continued walking from the executive corridor with deliberate, measured steps. Their pressed dress uniforms reflected the morning light streaming through the glass entrance, and every conversation throughout the station seemed to fade into the background. Officer Tyler Dawson instinctively straightened his posture. Caleb Mercer quickly adjusted his name tag and stepped away from the reception counter. Nobody had given a command to stand taller. Years of habit had done that automatically. Lieutenant Benjamin Carter led the small group, followed by several command staff members and representatives from City Hall. Tyler quietly whispered to Caleb, "Looks like this meeting is bigger than I thought." Caleb nodded. Maybe the mayor's office is announcing something. Neither of them noticed that Lieutenant Carter never glanced toward the reception desk. Instead, his eyes remained fixed on the woman who had spent the last several minutes patiently answering sarcastic questions without raising her voice even once. Around the lobby, officers shifted out of the walkway, creating a clear path through the center of the room. Imani Rhodes remained exactly where she had been standing. Calm. Relaxed. Unhurried. She rested one hand lightly against her portfolio while watching the approaching group with the quiet confidence of someone greeting familiar colleagues rather than waiting for strangers. Tyler folded his arms again, trying to recover the confidence he had displayed only moments before. "Well," he muttered with a grin, "this should settle whatever appointment she thinks she has." One detective standing nearby chuckled, although the laughter sounded noticeably weaker than before. Something about the atmosphere no longer encouraged jokes. An administrative assistant standing behind the security desk glanced nervously between Tyler and Imani. She recognized the name from internal emails circulated weeks earlier but had never seen the new executive in person. She opened her mouth to say something, hesitated, then closed it again. Before she could gather the courage to interrupt, Lieutenant Carter stopped only a few feet away from Imani. The entire command staff halted beside him. Without saying a word, the lieutenant extended his hand with genuine respect. "Good morning, Ms. Rhodes," he said warmly. "Welcome to Westbrook Police Headquarters. We've been looking forward to your arrival." For a brief second, nobody in the lobby moved. Tyler blinked once, convinced he had misunderstood what he had heard. Caleb looked from the lieutenant to Imani and back again. The woman they had treated like an unexpected visitor accepted the handshake with quiet professionalism. "Good morning, Lieutenant Carter," she replied. "Thank you. I appreciate the welcome." There was no sarcasm in her voice. No satisfaction. No hint that she intended to embarrass anyone. Her calmness somehow made the silence surrounding the conversation even heavier. One by one, the members of the command staff greeted her respectfully. Several addressed her by name. Others thanked her for making the trip. City officials exchanged polite smiles as though they were welcoming a respected colleague whose arrival had been carefully planned for months. Tyler felt the confidence draining from his face. He replayed every conversation from the last 10 minutes inside his head, hoping he had imagined at least some of it. Unfortunately, every careless joke returned with perfect clarity. The receptionist quietly lowered his eyes. Nearby officers stopped pretending to organize paperwork and openly watched the scene unfolding before them. Nobody spoke above a whisper anymore. It became painfully obvious that everyone in the room understood something important except the officers who had been laughing only minutes earlier. Lieutenant Carter turned slightly toward the conference hallway before looking back at Imani with an appreciative smile. "Everyone is assembled," he said. "Whenever you're ready, the department is waiting." Imani gave a small nod, glanced once across the silent lobby, and began walking toward the executive conference room. As she passed Tyler and Caleb, she neither paused nor looked at them with anger. She simply offered the same polite smile she had worn since entering the building. Somehow, that simple act of grace made the weight of the moment feel far greater than any harsh words ever could, leaving every officer wondering exactly who they had just spent the last 15 minutes underestimating. A title can command attention, but character determines what people remember after the applause ends. The conference room doors closed with a quiet click, leaving nearly every officer in the lobby frozen where they stood. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. Tyler Dawson stared toward the hallway as if expecting someone to explain what had just happened. Caleb Mercer slowly lowered the visitor badge he had been holding since Imani first walked through the front entrance. It suddenly felt much heavier than a simple piece of plastic. Did Lieutenant Carter just call her Ms. Rhodes? One patrol officer whispered. Another answered without taking his eyes off the hallway. He didn't just know her name. He welcomed her. The realization spread through the lobby faster than any official announcement could have. Every careless joke, every dismissive glance, every assumption replayed inside the minds of those who had witnessed the exchange. For the first time that morning, nobody found anything amusing. Inside the executive conference room, more than 60 supervisors, commanders, and city officials stood as Imani entered. The room was bright, lined with framed photographs honoring decades of service and community partnerships. At the far end stood a podium bearing the department's badge, beside an American flag and the state flag of Texas. Police Commissioner Harold Whitmore stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "Today marks an important chapter for the Westbrook Police Department." Every conversation stopped immediately. Imani quietly took her place beside the podium while Commissioner Whitmore continued. After a nationwide search focused on leadership, integrity, and organizational excellence, the city has selected an individual whose record reflects all three. She has led reform initiatives, improved officer retention, strengthened community trust, and built departments that people are proud to serve. Several command staff members nodded in agreement. They had read every page of her professional record weeks earlier. "It is my honor," the commissioner continued, "to introduce the new chief of police for the city of Westbrook, Chief Imani Rhodes." Applause filled the conference room. It was warm, genuine, and sustained. Imani accepted the recognition with a gracious smile before stepping to the podium. She waited until the room became completely quiet. "Thank you, Commissioner Whitmore," she said. "And thank you, everyone, for welcoming me today." Her voice was calm, confident, and surprisingly gentle. She didn't sound like someone eager to make a dramatic first impression. She sounded like someone prepared to begin working. "Leadership," she continued, "doesn't begin with policies. It begins with people. Every person who walks into this building deserves professionalism, respect, and fairness, whether they're wearing a uniform, applying for a position, reporting a crime, or simply asking for directions." Several supervisors exchanged thoughtful glances. The message seemed simple, yet every word carried weight. "The public notices how we treat people long before they notice our accomplishments," Imani said. "Our reputation isn't built during emergencies alone. It's built in ordinary moments, ordinary conversations, and ordinary choices." Outside the conference room, word had already begun spreading throughout the building. Officers who hadn't been in the lobby heard fragments of the story from co-workers. Some refused to believe it until they saw the official email arriving simultaneously on department computers. The subject line read, "Please welcome Chief Imani Rhodes." Tyler opened the message with trembling hands. There was her photograph. The same woman he had asked if she was waiting for human resources. The same woman. He had joked about meeting the chief. Only now the caption beneath the photograph made his stomach sink, "Chief of Police, Westbrook Police Department." He leaned back in silence, unable to think of a single excuse that sounded reasonable even inside his own head. Across the room, Caleb slowly removed the unused visitor badge from his hand and placed it back on the counter. Neither man spoke. Neither needed to. They both understood that the most uncomfortable lesson of their careers had begun long before the official introduction, and it had started the moment they assumed they already knew exactly who the woman standing in their lobby could never possibly be. The strongest leaders rarely begin by proving someone else was wrong. They begin by proving what is possible. When the applause inside the conference room finally settled, Chief Imani Rhodes looked across the faces of the department's leadership team before continuing her remarks. There was no triumph in her expression, no sign that she was enjoying the uncomfortable irony unfolding beyond the conference room doors. If anything, she seemed more interested in the future than the morning that had already become unforgettable. I know many of you have spent years serving this city, she began. Some of you have responded to disasters, protected neighborhoods through difficult times, and built relationships that deserve recognition. I'm not here to erase that work. I'm here to build on it. Several captains nodded quietly. The room relaxed almost immediately. They had expected a speech filled with promises of sweeping changes. Instead, they were hearing something far more practical. Every organization has room to improve, Imani continued. That includes every department I've ever worked in, including those I previously led. Improvement doesn't begin with blame. It begins with honesty. Commissioner Harold Whitmore smiled almost imperceptibly. This was exactly why the city had chosen her after interviewing candidates from across the country. Outside the conference room, the atmosphere throughout Westbrook Police Headquarters had changed completely. Officers who had missed the introduction were now reading the department-wide announcement on their computers. Conversations became shorter. Laughter disappeared. Tyler Dawson remained near the reception desk, staring at the email displayed on his monitor. Attached beneath Chief Rhodes' official portrait was a summary of her career, leadership awards, successful departmental reforms, years of command experience, and commendations from multiple agencies. Every accomplishment made his earlier assumptions seem more embarrassing. Caleb Mercer quietly walked over holding 2 fresh cups of coffee. He offered one to Tyler without saying a word. Tyler accepted it absent-mindedly. I can't believe we did that, he finally admitted. Caleb exhaled slowly. We didn't even ask enough questions. We thought we already knew the answers. Neither officer looked at the other. They didn't need to. The silence between them carried enough regret on its own. Across the lobby, the civilian receptionist who had sent something unusual earlier quietly organized paperwork while avoiding eye contact with everyone. She wasn't interested in watching anyone feel embarrassed. She simply hoped the morning would become a lesson rather than a lasting division inside the department. Back inside the conference room, Chief Rhodes stepped away from the podium and began walking slowly through the room instead of remaining behind the microphone. Over the next several weeks, she said, I'll spend time with every division. Patrol. Investigations. Communications. Records. Community outreach. Training. I want to understand what works well before deciding what needs to change. That statement immediately captured the attention of veteran supervisors. They had expected directives. Instead, they were hearing about listening. Experience matters, she continued. Every officer in this building has knowledge worth sharing. Leadership isn't about pretending one person has every answer. It's about creating an environment where the best ideas can come from anywhere. The room remained completely silent. Not because people were intimidated, but because they were listening. For many, this already felt different from previous leadership transitions. After the meeting concluded, Lieutenant Benjamin Carter approached Imani near the conference room entrance. Chief, he said respectfully, your office is ready whenever you'd like to see it. Imani smiled. In a few minutes. She glanced toward the lobby through the glass panels beside the hallway. She could easily see Tyler and Caleb standing near the reception area, their confident expressions from earlier replaced by unmistakable discomfort. Lieutenant Carter followed her gaze. Would you like me to speak with them? He asked quietly. Imani paused for a moment before gently shaking her head. No. Are you sure? Very. She adjusted the portfolio she had carried since entering the building that morning. People usually remember the lessons they discover themselves far longer than the one someone else forces upon them. With that, she calmly walked toward the lobby, not to embarrass anyone, not to demand apologies, but simply to begin her first official day as chief of police, leaving everyone who watched her wondering whether true authority had less to do with power and far more to do with the quiet confidence she had demonstrated from the moment she first walked through the front doors. Real authority isn't measured by how loudly people obey you. It's measured by how willingly they trust you. Chief Imani Rhodes stepped into the patrol briefing room just after noon, carrying nothing except the same leather portfolio she had brought into the building that morning. Word of her arrival had already spread through every hallway, every office, and every patrol division. Officers who had never met her now knew her name. Those who had witnessed the events in the lobby knew something else as well. She had every opportunity to embarrass people in return, and she had chosen not to. That decision alone had become the most discussed topic in the department. The afternoon patrol shift gathered around rows of tables while supervisors prepared the daily operational briefing. Normally, a new chief would observe from the back of the room during the first day. Instead, Imani quietly pulled out an empty chair near the middle of the room and sat beside patrol officers rather than apart from them. Several people exchanged surprised glances. Captain Melissa Grant smiled to herself. She had worked with enough executives to recognize how unusual that simple gesture was. Tyler Dawson entered the room moments later. His confidence from earlier had completely disappeared. He quietly chose a seat near the back, hoping not to attract attention. Caleb Mercer sat beside him, equally uncomfortable. Every time the room became quiet, Tyler found himself replaying the morning inside his head. The sarcastic comments. The assumptions. The laughter. None of it seemed distant anymore. It felt like it had happened only seconds ago. Captain Grant introduced the afternoon assignments before turning toward Imani. "Chief, would you like to say a few words before we head out?" Imani stood slowly. "Just a few." The room became silent. First, she began, "Thank you for the work you do every day. Most people never see the long hours behind the badge. They don't see missed family dinners, interrupted holidays, or the difficult decisions made in a matter of seconds." Officers listened carefully. This wasn't the speech they had expected. "I also want everyone here to know something important," she continued. "I'm not interested in leading this department from behind a closed office door. Over the next several weeks, you'll see me riding with patrol, visiting every division, and learning how each team serves this city." A few officers nodded approvingly. Others looked genuinely relieved. Then she paused for a moment before adding, "The strongest departments are built on mutual respect. That respect isn't reserved for supervisors. It belongs to everyone we meet, our co-workers, our community, and every person who walks through our front doors." Several officers quietly lowered their eyes. Tyler understood exactly what she meant. She had never mentioned the lobby. She had never mentioned names. She didn't need to. The lesson reached everyone without a single accusation. After the briefing ended, patrol teams dispersed toward the parking garage. Tyler remained behind, watching as the room slowly emptied. Caleb lightly touched his shoulder. "You going?" Tyler shook his head. "Not yet." A few minutes later, Imani collected her notes and prepared to leave. Tyler finally gathered enough courage to approach her. "Chief Rhodes?" he asked quietly. She turned with the same calm expression she had worn all day. "Yes, Officer Dawson." Tyler hesitated. "I'd like to apologize for how I treated you this morning." The words came slowly, each one heavier than the last. "I made assumptions I never should have made. I was disrespectful, and I'm genuinely sorry." The room fell silent again. Caleb watched from several feet away without interrupting. Imani looked at Tyler for a brief moment before offering a small, reassuring smile. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "Apologies matter because they show we're willing to learn." Tyler nodded. "I understand." She continued, "What matters even more is what happens tomorrow. Every new person who walks into this building deserves the version of you that's learned something today, not the version from this morning." Tyler felt the tension leave his shoulders for the first time all day. She hadn't ignored what happened. She also hadn't allowed it to define the future. As she walked toward the exit, nearly every officer who passed through the hallway greeted her with genuine respect. Not because she had revealed a powerful title, but because in only a single day she had demonstrated the kind of leadership that could never be earned through rank alone. A culture never changes because one person gives a speech. It changes when ordinary people begin making different choices. By the end of Chief Imani Rhodes' first week, the atmosphere inside Westbrook Police Headquarters felt noticeably different. The change had not come from new policies posted on bulletin boards or strict directives delivered through department-wide emails. It had emerged through dozens of quiet moments that most people would never notice. Officers greeted visitors more warmly. Civilian employees were included in conversations instead of being overlooked. Supervisors spent more time listening before giving instructions. None of these changes made headlines, yet together they slowly reshaped the character of the building. True to her word, Imani spent each day in a different division. Monday began with patrol officers during the early morning briefing. Tuesday found her sitting beside dispatchers, learning how they balance dozens of emergencies at once while remaining calm under constant pressure. Wednesday she visited the evidence unit, thanking technicians whose work rarely received public recognition despite its importance to every investigation. Thursday she rode with neighborhood officers through residential communities, introducing herself to local business owners and residents instead of remaining inside headquarters. Everywhere she went, she asked the same simple question. What is one thing we can do better together? People were surprised she actually waited for the answer. She took notes. She asked follow-up questions. Sometimes she disagreed respectfully, but she never dismissed anyone simply because of rank or job title. Before long, officers realized those conversations were not symbolic. Several practical suggestions from frontline employees were already being implemented. Captain Melissa Grant watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction. During one command meeting she remarked, "I've never seen people volunteer ideas this quickly after a leadership transition." Lieutenant Benjamin Carter nodded. Because they believe someone's finally listening. Meanwhile, Tyler Dawson carried the memory of his first interaction with Chief Rhodes into every shift. The embarrassment had not disappeared, but it had evolved into something more useful. During afternoon patrol one rainy Friday, an elderly man entered headquarters looking confused and anxious. He clutched several folded papers and hesitated near the entrance exactly where Imani had stood on her first morning. A week earlier, Tyler might have assumed the man simply needed directions and hurried him elsewhere. Instead, he walked over with a welcoming smile. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I help you today?" The man's shoulders visibly relaxed. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I'm not sure I'm even in the right place." Tyler shook his head. "Let's find out together." He patiently listened, contacted the appropriate department, and personally guided the visitor to the correct office rather than pointing down the hallway. The entire interaction lasted less than 10 minutes, but Caleb Mercer had witnessed every second of it from the reception desk. As the visitor disappeared into the administrative offices, Caleb smiled. That looked different. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. It felt different too. Because? Tyler looked toward the front entrance before answering. Because I finally understood that you never know who's standing in front of you, or what kind of day they're already having. Later that afternoon, Chief Rhodes happened to pass through the lobby. She noticed Tyler helping another visitor locate a detective's office with the same patience and professionalism he had shown the elderly man earlier. She didn't interrupt. She simply observed from a distance before continuing toward her office. Captain Grant quietly noticed the exchange. "You saw that, didn't you?" she asked. Imani smiled. "I did. Are you going to say anything to him?" Imani gently shook her head. "He doesn't need praise for treating people with respect. That should simply become who we are." Grant smiled in agreement. As evening settled over Westbrook, the lobby where everything had begun 1 week earlier looked exactly the same on the outside. The polished floors still reflected the overhead lights. Radios still crackled with urgent calls. Officers still hurried through the doors preparing for another shift. Yet something invisible had changed within those walls. The lesson that started with one mistaken assumption had quietly become part of the department's culture, proving that the most meaningful reforms often begin not with dramatic confrontations, but with the simple decision to treat every person with equal dignity before knowing anything about the title they carry. Respect becomes real when people continue doing the right thing after no one is watching. Nearly 3 months had passed since the unforgettable morning Chief Imani Rhodes first walked through the front doors of Westbrook Police Headquarters. The story had quietly become part of the department's history, not because anyone officially documented it, but because every new employee eventually heard some version of what had happened. Yet the story no longer centered on embarrassment. Instead, it had become an example of how quickly assumptions could be replaced by professionalism when people chose to grow rather than defend their mistakes. The most noticeable transformation could be seen in Officer Tyler Dawson. His fellow officers often joked that he had become the unofficial welcome committee for the station, although there was genuine admiration behind the humor. Every visitor entering the building received the same courteous greeting regardless of appearance, clothing, age, or purpose. Whether someone arrived wearing an expensive business suit or work boots covered with dust from a construction site, Tyler treated each person with identical patience. Caleb Mercer noticed it every day. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, a teenage girl walked into headquarters carrying a backpack and a stack of school folders. She looked nervous as she approached the reception desk. Tyler immediately stood and smiled. "Good afternoon. How can I help you today?" She hesitated before answering. "I'm here for the youth leadership internship interview, but I think I'm early." Tyler checked the schedule. "Actually, you're right on time. Let me show you where you'll be meeting the coordinator." As they walked toward the interview room, the teenager smiled with visible relief. "Thank you," she said. "I was really nervous." Tyler laughed softly. "First days can feel overwhelming. Trust me, I know." Caleb watched them disappear down the hallway and couldn't help smiling. Later that afternoon, Chief Rhodes happened to pass through the lobby once again. Tyler returned from the interview area just as she approached the reception desk. "Good afternoon, Chief," he said naturally. "Good afternoon, Officer Dawson." She glanced toward the hallway where the young applicant had gone. "Future intern?" Tyler nodded. "She looked nervous, so I thought I'd walk her over." Imani smiled warmly. "I'm glad you did." It was only a brief exchange, lasting no more than 15 seconds, yet Caleb noticed something important. Tyler no longer seemed driven by guilt over the event of his first day with Chief Rhodes. He had reached a point where kindness had become habit rather than correction. That evening, the command staff gathered for a monthly leadership meeting. After reviewing operational updates and community outreach reports, Captain Melissa Grant shared the latest citizen feedback survey. This quarter, she announced, our front desk satisfaction ratings are the highest they've been in more than 5 years. Several supervisors looked pleasantly surprised. The comments mention respectful communication, helpful staff, and welcoming first impressions, she continued. People consistently say they felt heard from the moment they entered the building. Commissioner Harold Whitmore, attending as an observer, looked toward Chief Rhodes with an approving smile. "Congratulations," he said. "That's not something you can order people to do." Imani gently shook her head. "No. Culture changes because people decide it's worth changing." After the meeting, Lieutenant Benjamin Carter walked beside her through the now quiet hallway. "Do you ever think about your first morning here?" he asked. Imani smiled thoughtfully. "Sometimes. I imagine it wasn't easy." She looked toward the lobby, where Tyler was helping another visitor complete paperwork with the same patience he now showed everyone. "Actually," she replied softly, "I'm grateful for it." Carter looked surprised. "Grateful?" "Because if people hadn't made assumptions that morning, we might never have had the opportunity to prove that a department can become stronger without humiliating anyone in return." They paused for a moment, watching officers and civilians interact naturally throughout the building. There were no dramatic speeches, no public apologies, and no reminders of the mistakes made months earlier. There was simply a workplace that had slowly learned to treat every person who entered its doors with the same dignity. In that quiet success, Chief Imani Rhodes found something far more meaningful than winning an argument. She had helped build a culture where respect was no longer dependent on rank, reputation, or appearance, but had become the ordinary standard by which everyone measured themselves. You never truly know who changed your life until you look back and realize you became someone better because of them. Nearly a year after Chief Imani Rhodes first walked into Westbrook Police Headquarters, the story of that ordinary Monday morning had taken on a life of its own. New recruits heard it during orientation. Veteran officers quietly shared it with younger colleagues whenever conversations drifted toward first impressions or professional conduct. Yet as the months passed, the details that people remembered most were no longer about mistaken assumptions or awkward silence. They remembered something much more powerful. They remembered how the person with every reason to seek revenge had instead chosen to lead with grace. On the anniversary of her first day, the department hosted its annual Community Partnership Appreciation event. Families, local business owners, teachers, firefighters, emergency medical personnel, neighborhood volunteers, and civic leaders gathered inside the headquarters for an open house celebrating cooperation between law enforcement and the public. Children climbed into patrol vehicles parked outside. Community volunteers toured the communication center. Officers answered questions, demonstrated equipment, and spent the afternoon talking with residents instead of rushing from one emergency call to another. The atmosphere was relaxed, welcoming, and remarkably different from the culture that had existed only a year earlier. Chief Rhodes moved quietly through the crowd, greeting visitors by name whenever she could remember them. She paused to thank volunteers, congratulated young students participating in the department's youth leadership program, and spent several minutes listening to an elderly couple describe how safe they now felt attending neighborhood meetings. She never hurried conversation simply because someone wasn't wearing a uniform. Tyler Dawson watched everything from nearby while helping direct visitors through the building. At one point, a little boy tugged gently on his uniform sleeve. "Excuse me, officer," the child asked shyly, "how do you become a police officer?" Tyler knelt to meet him at eye level. "You start by learning how to help people," he answered with a smile. "Everything else comes after that." Chief Rhodes happened to hear the exchange as she walked past. Their eyes met briefly across the hallway. Neither said anything. They didn't need to. The lesson that had begun on her first morning had quietly reached another generation without anyone mentioning the past. Later that afternoon, Commissioner Harold Whitmore stepped to the podium to thank everyone for attending. Before concluding the ceremony, he invited Chief Rhodes to offer a few closing remarks. The room settled into complete silence as she approached the microphone. She looked around at the crowd, officers standing beside community members, children laughing with first responders, volunteers talking comfortably with detectives, and smiled. "When I accepted the opportunity to serve this department," she began, "I hoped we could build something stronger than policies or procedures alone. I hoped we could build trust." She paused for a moment before continuing. "Trust doesn't begin during the biggest moments of our careers. It begins in the smallest ones. It begins with a greeting, with a conversation, with the decision to listen before judging, and with the understanding that every person deserves dignity before they've earned our approval." Around the room, heads slowly nodded. Tyler stood near the back, listening more carefully than anyone. "Titles may introduce us," Imani said softly, "but our daily choices are what people remember. Every person who walks through these doors is someone's parent, someone's child, someone's friend, someone's neighbor. If we never forget that, we'll never lose sight of why we chose this profession." The audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to last longer than anyone expected. It wasn't simply applause for a police chief. It was appreciation for a leader who had transformed a difficult first impression into an opportunity for lasting growth. As the event came to an end and the last visitors slowly made their way toward the exit, sunlight streamed through the same glass entrance where the entire story had begun 1 year earlier. Chief Imani Rhodes paused there for a brief moment before stepping outside. She smiled as another visitor entered the building and was immediately welcomed with warmth and respect by the officers inside. The culture had changed. The lesson had endured. And in the end, the most unforgettable words of her first day were never, "I'm your new chief." The real message had been demonstrated long before those words were ever spoken. Every person deserves respect before anyone knows their title.